Ethan's words cut through Maria like a blade. The moment he said, "You can't afford it, Mom," loud enough for the cafe to turn and stare. She held her breath, pretending the sting didn't burn, pretending the sun she raised with softness wasn't now measuring her worth in dollars and ceilings she could never reach. But inside her chest, something cracked, something old, something tired. Ethan bragged about the penthouse party he was invited to as if he were floating above her, as if she belonged on the ground looking up. Maria whispered nothing, only wondering how the boy she once carried could now look at her like, wait. What truth could destroy their family forever? Why did her own child believe wealth defined respect? Who planted the poison that made him ashamed of her? What would happen when he learned the penthouse he boasted about was hers? And when the truth hit, who would pay the price? Maria walked down the busy street, with her heartbeat still echoing Ethan's words, each step making the world feel colder. She wondered when her son began measuring her value by price tags, instead of memories, when warmth became something he only offered to people who could elevate his status. The city buzzed around her, cars honking, laughter spilling from restaurant doors, people rushing past. But her mind stayed locked on the moment her son looked at her as if she were beneath him. She replayed every choice she made since the divorce, every sacrifice she'd hidden, every moment she comforted Ethan alone. Did he ever truly see her? Or had Daniel and Victoria already replaced her in his heart? As she turned the corner toward the train station, Maria felt a quiet ache rising. Maybe the truth she kept to protect him was the very thing now tearing them apart. Maria sat on the train, hands folded tightly, staring at the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. She had spent so many years trying to stay small, convincing herself Ethan needed peace between his parents more than he needed the truth. But now she wondered if her silence had become a weapon used against her. Ethan's voice echoed again. "You can't afford it." Words so careless, yet sharp enough to reopen every wound from her marriage. She remembered Daniel telling her she'd never be successful without him, that she didn't have the drive or the vision. And now their son was repeating those same lines. The train rattled through the tunnel, lights flickering, and Maria felt something shift inside her. A realization that hiding her strength hadn't protected Ethan. It had misled him. By the time Maria reached her apartment, the sun had dipped below the skyline, leaving a soft twilight glow that filled the room with muted lavender shadows. She placed her bag on the counter and stood in silence, letting the quiet settle over her. This was supposed to be her safe place, the one corner of the world untouched by judgment or comparison. But tonight, it felt too small, too fragile. As if Ethan's words had seeped through the walls. She replayed his tone, the dismissive glance, the way he seemed embarrassed to be seen with her. It wasn't anger that filled her. It was grief. A grief only a parent could understand. The grief of realizing your child sees you through someone else's distorted lens. And in that moment, Maria wondered how long she had been losing him without noticing. Maria moved to her desk, opened her laptop, and stared at the folder she kept hidden for years. Contracts, design proposals, invoices, every piece of proof of the life she rebuilt. She clicked through the documents slowly, almost reverently, remembering how she worked late nights while Ethan slept, how she hid her progress so Daniel couldn't twist it, how every milestone felt like claiming a piece of herself back, and yet none of it seemed to matter to Ethan. He only saw the surface, what she didn't flaunt, what she didn't show. Maria closed her eyes and exhaled, realizing she could no longer protect him from the truth. He deserved to know who she really was. Even if it shattered the image Daniel and Victoria painted, she could no longer stay silent while her son drifted farther away. Ethan strutted into his father's house that evening, his confidence glowing brighter than the chandelier above him. Victoria greeted him with her usual polished smile, the kind that felt warm only on the surface. She asked about his day, and when Ethan mentioned the cafe incident, her smile sharpened, pleased in a way that made something invisible tighten around him. She told him that Maria needed to understand her limits, reinforcing the poisonous idea that success was a world his mother didn't belong in. Daniel walked in moments later, nodding approvingly as Victoria spoke, as if Ethan insulting his own mother was a sign of maturity. Ethan felt a flash of unease, brief, unwelcome, but it disappeared under the weight of their praise. He didn't realize how easily approval could replace truth, or how quickly love could be twisted into superiority. At dinner, Victoria spoke with the smooth tone of someone planting seeds disguised as compliments. She mentioned exclusive events, social circles, and people Ethan fit in with now, each remark slipping under his skin like silk-wrapped hooks. Daniel nodded through every sentence, reinforcing the idea that Ethan was rising in status, far above the life Maria could ever offer. Ethan didn't notice how carefully their words steered him, how they made humility feel like weakness and loyalty feel outdated. He only felt the warm glow of belonging, unaware of how it isolated him from the person who had always stood by him. As Victoria's words drifted through the room, Ethan felt a faint sting when he remembered Mariah's expression at the cafe, but he pushed it down, convincing himself she would understand eventually. After all, wasn't he supposed to aim higher? Later that night, Ethan retreated to his room, the praise from dinner still humming in his ears. He lay on his bed, scrolling through social media, comparing lives, measuring worth through filtered perfection. Somewhere between the curated photos and the bragging posts, he stumbled onto a video of Maria from years ago, laughing, carrying him on her back at a park, sunlight dancing across their faces. The memory hit harder than he expected, cracking the armor he had built. Why did remembering her warmth feel uncomfortable now? Why did he feel guilty for enjoying Victoria's validation? Ethan shook off the feeling, telling himself people changed and paths diverged. But as he turned off his phone, the echo of Mariah's laughter lingered, reminding him of a version of himself he wasn't sure he still recognized. Victoria knocked lightly before entering Ethan's room, her voice soft like she was offering comfort rather than control. She commented on his tired expression and gently suggested that Maria meant well, but didn't understand the world he was stepping into. The words slipped into Ethan's thoughts like smoke, spreading before he could push them away. Part of him wanted to defend his mother, but another part wanted to believe Victoria, believe that he was meant for more. Victoria sat beside him, speaking about reputation, opportunity, and choosing the right influences. Her tone was warm, her smile reassuring, but her message carved deeper into the gap growing between him and Maria. Ethan nodded slowly, unaware that agreement meant surrendering a piece of himself. Back in her apartment, Maria sat at her small dining table, hands clasped, staring at her silent phone. She wanted to call Ethan, wanted to hear his voice, wanted even a simple message, but fear held her still. She didn't want to push him further away by appearing desperate. She had watched him drift for months, each step influenced by someone else, each change a little further from the boy she raised. Tonight, her loneliness felt heavier than usual, not because Ethan wasn't there, but because she no longer knew if he wanted to be. The truth she hid to protect him now felt like a secret building a wall between them, and Maria felt a tremble of dread, wondering whether revealing it would save him or break them both. Ethan stepped into the penthouse lobby with his friends, feeling a rush of pride as they marveled at the towering ceilings and shimmering marble floors. He pretended he belonged there, pretended this world recognized him, pretended he earned the privilege instead of being invited as someone's plus one. But the deeper they walked, the louder his heartbeat became. Something about the polished bronze fixtures and the warm light spilling through the hall triggered a strange familiarity, like a memory he couldn't place. When the elevator doors opened and the skyline unfolded before him, Ethan felt a flicker of uncertainty. This place felt too much like Mariah's taste. Simple elegance, understated beauty, calm colors. For the first time that night, pride eased into confusion, and confusion slipped into unease. Why did he feel like his mother's presence was lingering here? The penthouse door opened with a soft click, revealing an expansive living space, washed in late afternoon sunlight. Ethan's friends rushed ahead, excitedly exploring the open kitchen and panoramic windows. Ethan stayed behind, struck by the soft neutral tones, the gentle textures, the carefully placed decor. Every detail felt like Maria. Her quiet elegance, her love of warm, natural light, her habit of mixing gentle earth tones with subtle metals. A strange pressure tightened in his chest as he approached the marble counter and noticed a familiar arrangement of lavender stems, the same kind Maria kept at home. His fingertips brushed the smooth surface, and something inside him faltered. This wasn't coincidence. This felt personal. Like he had stepped into a part of her world he never knew existed. Ethan wandered into the study, seeking answers he couldn't quite name. The room felt even more like her. Minimalist shelves, handcrafted pottery, neatly arranged design books. He moved slowly, touching the spine of a familiar book Maria once used when learning color theory. His chest tightened. He reached the desk and opened a drawer casually, expecting party supplies or random items, but instead he found paperwork, design draft sketches, client proposals, all signed by Maria Alvarez. The air left his lungs. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Why was her name here? Why did she have documents in this penthouse he believed belonged to someone wealthy, someone he saw as above her? The foundations of everything he assumed about his mother and himself began to tremble. Ethan stepped back from the desk, breath shaky, mind racing. Why would Maria have work here? Why would her documents be in a penthouse he thought was worlds away from her life? He grabbed a sleek binder and opened it, expecting a client's name. Someone rich, someone influential, someone fitting the narrative he built. But the first page made his stomach drop. Penthouse ownership, Maria Alvarez. His hands trembled as truth struck him with brutal force. All the pride he borrowed from Daniel and Victoria, all the superiority he displayed toward Maria, shattered in seconds. His mother wasn't small. She wasn't struggling. She wasn't who they told him she was. She was the owner of everything he had been bragging about. And he had humiliated her without knowing the strength she carried. Sweat gathered at Ethan's temples as he set the binder down, realizing how deeply he had misjudged the woman who raised him. Every harsh word he threw at her, every moment he chose Victoria's approval over Mariah's love, now felt like a weight pulling him under. His friends stayed quiet, sensing the collapse of everything he believed about his mother. Ethan replayed each moment where he dismissed her simplicity, never considering that her quietness wasn't weakness. It was strength carried without applause. Shame crawled up his spine as he imagined facing her, knowing he had spoken to her like she was beneath him. The boy who once held her hand at playgrounds, who trusted her completely, now felt like a stranger to her. And he didn't know if he deserved forgiveness. Ethan left the study and walked into the living room as if the floor were tilting under him. Every detail of the penthouse, every lamp, every color, every gentle texture, now felt like it was whispering Mariah's name. His friends kept their distance, unsure how to help when the truth itself felt heavier than gravity. Ethan's pulse thudded painfully as he tried to make sense of everything. The lavender, the design books, the proposals, the ownership documents, it all pointed to one reality, that his mother had built a life far greater than he ever imagined. And he had never even thanked her for surviving what tore her apart. Shame rolled through him in waves, cold and consuming. He wondered how many times she stayed silent so he wouldn't feel caught between parents, how many battles she fought without recognition. And all he gave her in return was disrespect. Ethan excused himself and stepped onto the balcony, the cool wind slicing through his heated thoughts. His chest tightened as he stared out at the skyline, each skyscraper a reminder of everything he misunderstood about his mother. He remembered her sitting at the kitchen table late at night, papers spread everywhere, thinking she was just exhausted, never realizing she was building a world she didn't show him, not because she wanted to hide, but because she didn't want to turn him against his father. Ethan felt his throat burn with guilt. How had he been so blind? How had he allowed Victoria's silky words and Daniel's approval to twist his view of the person who loved him unconditionally? The city below sparkled calmly, but Ethan's thoughts churned like a storm he could no longer ignore. Ethan finally gathered the courage to call Maria, but when the phone rang only once before going to voicemail, panic tightened inside him. He imagined her alone, remembering his cruel words from the cafe, believing he didn't care. His breath shook as he left a message that didn't sound like an apology, just a broken whisper of, "Please call me." Moments later, he tried again and again, each call slipping into silence. His friends exchanged nervous glances, but Ethan barely noticed, trapped in the shame of knowing he'd been absent from her world while she quietly built something extraordinary. He wondered if she was hurt beyond repair, if he had waited too long to open his eyes. And for the first time, he feared losing the one person whose love had never been conditional. When Maria finally picked up on the 7th call, her voice was soft but strained, like she had been holding herself together for hours. Ethan froze, guilt flooding him instantly. He tried to apologize, stumbling through words that felt too small for the damage he caused. But Maria stayed quiet, her silence more painful than any accusation. She asked why he was calling so late, why he sounded shaken, and the truth tangled on Ethan's tongue. Should he tell her he found out about the penthouse, that he had been mocking her without knowing she owned the very luxury he admired? Shame hollowed him. He wanted to tell her everything, but fear held him in place. When Maria finally sighed and said she needed rest, the call ended with a heaviness that nearly broke him. After the call, Ethan felt something inside him finally break. He lowered himself to the floor, leaning against the window as the city lights blurred behind tears he could no longer hold back. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder while Leo sat beside him, but their presence couldn't soften the truth. Ethan had hurt the one person who never abandoned him. He thought of the years Maria spent supporting him alone, the nights she stayed awake, helping with homework, the quiet sacrifices she made so he would never feel less than. And now he realized he had traded her love for shallow approval. The weight of that betrayal pressed into him like stone. He whispered that he needed to make things right. Not tomorrow. Not eventually. But now, before the distance became irreversible. Maria spent the morning pacing her apartment, her thoughts restless and heavy. Last night's calls from Ethan left her unsettled, his shaking voice replaying in her mind like an unfinished sentence. She could hear something different in him. Fear, regret, maybe even shame. But part of her didn't know if she could trust that shift. She had spent years absorbing his distance, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending she didn't notice how Daniel and Victoria slowly rewrote her place in his mind. Now, as a faint drizzle painted streaks across her window, Maria wondered if she should finally tell Ethan the truth about everything she built. Not to boast, not to punish him, but because hiding had only allowed others to shape his reality. She exhaled deeply, realizing the moment she avoided for years had finally arrived. When Ethan finally made it to her apartment building, he hesitated at the entrance, palms sweaty, heart pounding as he imagined facing the woman he had failed so deeply. The elevator ride felt endless, each floor echoing a memory of her kindness he brushed aside. By the time he reached her door, guilt sat so heavily on his chest, he could barely breathe. When Maria opened the door, she didn't smile. She simply looked at him with a quiet sadness that made his body collapse into shame. Ethan tried to speak, but the words tangled. He wasn't sure if he deserved to explain, or if she even wanted to hear him. All he knew was he needed to tell the truth. Not to fix everything at once, but to show her. He finally saw her clearly. Inside, Ethan stood in the center of the living room, his voice shaking as he finally explained what he discovered at the penthouse. Her documents, her designs, her ownership. Maria listened without moving, her breath caught between hurt and disbelief. She had spent years hiding her accomplishments so he wouldn't feel torn between parents, and now that secrecy had become the very reason he misunderstood her. Ethan admitted everything. The pride he felt at the penthouse, the shame when he realized it was hers, the guilt that hit him like a tidal wave. As he spoke, Maria felt her heart fracture and mend at the same time. His words were imperfect, trembling, but real. For the first time in a long while, she sensed her son was speaking from a place untouched by anyone else's influence. Maria finally sat down, exhaustion settling over her as she told Ethan the truth she had carried like a hidden weight. She explained the years after the divorce, the debt, the small jobs, the long nights studying design while Ethan slept, the clients she fought to earn, and the slow rise that eventually led to owning the penthouse. She confessed she stayed silent because she didn't want him to feel caught between families, didn't want Daniel claiming she was showing off, didn't want Victoria twisting her motives. Ethan listened with growing horror, realizing every judgment he made was built on lies someone else fed him. Maria's voice wavered when she admitted the hardest part, that she still loved him even when he made her feel invisible. Ethan felt his entire world shift, understanding the depth of her sacrifice. When Maria finished speaking, the room fell into a quiet so deep, Ethan felt it echo in his bones. He moved closer and apologized again. This time, not from panic, but from raw understanding. He admitted he let himself be shaped by people who never cared about his heart the way she did, who praised him only when it benefited them. Maria's eyes softened with a grief that had lived inside her far too long. She reached out, gently placing her hand over his, not in forgiveness yet, but in acknowledgement that he was trying. Ethan felt a tear slip down his cheek as he whispered, he wanted to rebuild what he broke, even if it took years. Maria didn't promise anything, but she didn't pull her hand away either. And for now, that was enough. Ethan walked into his father's house the next afternoon with a new heaviness in his chest. The moment he stepped through the doorway, the place felt different. Colder, smaller, as if the illusion he once admired had finally cracked. Victoria greeted him with her flawless smile, expecting the same eager version of him she had shaped. But Ethan didn't feel like that person anymore. He watched her carefully, noticing the subtle tilt of her chin, the way her eyes scanned him as if checking whether he still belonged to her influence. When Daniel entered, his confident stride made Ethan flinch with a new awareness. He could hear the quiet manipulation in their tone, the casual dismissal of anyone they deemed inferior. For the first time, Ethan recognized how deeply he'd let them define his world. And he felt the sharp pull to reclaim his own mind, even if it meant confrontation. Victoria led him into the living room, her voice dripping with practiced warmth as she began subtly probing, asking if he'd spoken to Maria, asking why he left the house so early, asking questions that pretended to care but pressed for control. Tell me your way. Ethan studied her, finally recognizing the manipulation beneath her polished tone. Her comments about Maria, once easy for him to accept, now sounded sharp and poisonous. When she told him he needed to prioritize relationships that elevate him, something inside him snapped. He realized she never wanted him to grow. She wanted him dependent, molded to fit her world. The realization hit him hard, shaking loose the loyalty he once felt. He spoke less, listened more, watching Victoria's smile widen as if she sensed she was losing her hold. For the first time, Ethan didn't shrink, he observed. Daniel entered the room mid-conversation, effortlessly stepping into his familiar role as the authoritative voice. He questioned Ethan about why he seemed distant, his tone sharp with expectation rather than concern. Ethan watched both of them speak, Victoria with her sweetly sharpened words, Daniel with his dismissive certainty, and realized how easily they had shaped him. They never asked how he felt. They asked whether he aligned with them. When Daniel made a comment implying Maria was lucky to scrape by, Ethan's breath caught. This time he didn't swallow it. He looked his father in the eyes and said that Maria didn't scrape. She built. The room's temperature shifted instantly. Victoria's smile froze. Daniel's eyes narrowed. And for the first time, Ethan felt a spark of the courage Maria carried her whole life. Daniel scoffed, brushing aside Ethan's words like they were childish. But Ethan didn't back down. He told his father everything. How Maria rebuilt her life. How she owned the penthouse. How he had been repeating harmful lies without ever questioning them. Daniel's face stiffened, anger flashing behind controlled eyes. Victoria attempted to interrupt, her voice syrupy and defensive, insisting Maria must have manipulated him. But Ethan cut her off, his voice steady for the first time. He said he finally understood how they used pride as a leash, and how willingly he wore it. The silence that followed was icy, sharp enough to slice through the room. Daniel's jaw clenched. Victoria's smile collapsed, and Ethan felt the moment he stepped out from under their shadow. After the storm of confrontation, Ethan walked out of the house without waiting for their approval, each step feeling like breaking a chain he didn't know he wore. The air outside felt clearer, cooler, almost cleansing. For the first time in years, he felt like himself. Not the version crafted by Daniel and Victoria, but the boy Maria raised with love and honesty. He knew rebuilding trust with her would take time, but he also knew he couldn't return to the lies he once lived in. As he stepped onto the sidewalk and watched the sunlight stretch across the pavement, Ethan felt something steady forming inside him. A commitment to stand by the truth, to choose love over status, and to protect the relationship he nearly destroyed. Ethan arrived at the penthouse with a knot in his stomach, the weight of everything he'd learned pressing against every breath. As he stepped into the quiet space, he finally saw the home not as a symbol of luxury, but as a reflection of Mariah's resilience. Every detail a piece of the woman he had overlooked. He paced near the windows, rehearsing the apology he had carried like a burning stone in his chest, though he knew words could never fully mend what he broke. When he heard the door open, his heart stuttered. Maria stepped inside, her expression neutral but tired, as if bracing for more hurt. Ethan took a shaky breath and told her he wanted to speak here because this place represented the truth she never flaunted, the truth he failed to respect. For the first time, he wanted to listen more than he wanted to be right. Ethan struggled to speak at first, his throat tight with remorse. But once the words began spilling out, he couldn't stop. He confessed everything. The arrogance, the blind trust he placed in Daniel and Victoria, the way he repeated their words without thinking, the shame he felt realizing how wrongly he judged her. Maria listened quietly, her expression shifting with each truth he revealed. Ethan admitted that discovering the penthouse belonged to her shattered the image he had been taught to believe, and for the first time, he saw the strength in her silence. He told her he didn't expect forgiveness, only a chance to earn back his place in her life. Mariah's eyes softened, but the hurt in them remained. Love didn't erase wounds, but she could finally see that he was trying to understand the depth of his mistakes. Maria took a slow breath before responding, her voice steady but fragile. She told Ethan she never wanted him to feel small compared to Daniel's wealth, never wanted him to choose between parents, never wanted to weaponize success the way others did. She explained how she hid her achievements to protect him from becoming a pawn in old resentments. Hearing her truth made Ethan's chest ache with regret. He saw the loneliness she carried. The years she spent pretending his distance didn't hurt. When she finally asked why he believed lies about her so easily, Ethan lowered his head, admitting the answer he hated most. It was easier to impress people who praised him than honor the one who loved him unconditionally. Maria closed her eyes, letting the truth settle painfully between them, but also seeing the boy she raised beneath the guilt. The tension slowly eased as Ethan stepped closer, asking what he could do to rebuild her trust. Maria didn't give him an easy answer. She told him trust wasn't repaired with promises, but with consistency, patience, and humility. She said she needed time, not apologies. Ethan nodded, accepting the truth without protest. He knew rebuilding meant facing uncomfortable truths about himself and distancing from the people who shaped his arrogance. Maria studied him closely, noticing the sincerity in his eyes, a sincerity she hadn't seen in years. For the first time, she believed change might be possible, not because he said the right words, but because he finally understood the weight behind them. Ethan whispered that he wanted to make her proud, and Maria felt her heart soften, letting the first small ray of hope in. Maria walked toward a drawer near the kitchen, opening it slowly as Ethan waited with uncertainty. She pulled out a small silver key, running her thumb across its smooth surface before turning back to him. Ethan's breath caught as she placed it in his hand. She explained it wasn't a gift of ownership or an invitation to take advantage. It was a symbol that she still believed in the bond they once had, a quiet promise that he could rebuild his place in her life if he chose to do so. With honesty and humility, Ethan felt tears rise as he clutched the key, realizing the depth of the forgiveness she was offering. Not instant, not unconditional, but real. Maria watched him carefully, knowing their relationship wouldn't return to what it once was, but perhaps it could become something stronger. And for the first time, both allowed themselves to imagine a future healed by truth.